Now, for the last couple of years, I have copied out by hand the works of authors that I respect and whose styles that I want to merge into my own. That means of late I've been copying out by hand Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. I've been copying out by hand Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections. I've been copying out by hand William Shakespeare's King Lear, also Hamlet. I've been picking up magazines that I respect, like The Spectator. I recently picked up the New Yorker and copied out Ernest Hemingway's unpublished story. And the reason that I'm doing this is because there's a long tradition of writers being able to better their ability by copying the works of others. Now, I first pricked up to this idea when I read about Robert Louis Stevenson. Robert Louis Stevenson is one of my favourite authors of all time. Dr. Jekyll is absolutely life-changing. I did a video on that. If you're interested, you can check out the evil in us all. And what Louis Stevenson did, and many have actually picked up on this, like G.K. Chesterton, many have said that his ability to get the grasp and find the right turn of phrase, the most evocative imagery, is uncanny. But he's a great writer. Read him and you'll see that he also wrote Treasure Island, he wrote Kidnapped, he wrote a load of really great books. But Stevenson set himself a self-improvement plan where what he would do is he would copy the works of other writers that he respected. What does that look like? Basically, Stevenson, he would read a passage twice through with extreme attention to detail, and then he would try to replicate it from memory. Then he would compare the two and see how close he got. At the beginning, he couldn't get it very close at all, and there would be disparities, and then he would try and correct that. But as he went on and on and on over the years, he found that it became easier and easier, and he could reproduce whole chunks, which obviously would improve your memory. But so what I would do when I first started Stevenson's approach, I would do sentence by sentence. So I'd read a sentence through a couple of times, try and get the rhythm in my mind, try and get the imagery, try to pretend for a second that I'm the writer, which is so much fun because Cormac McCarthy, for example, is a fantastic writer. One could only hope and dream to even have a fraction of his ability. So it's quite fun to think, I'm Cormac McCarthy. And then you reproduce that sentence. Now, if you've done that successfully, do that again, and you get in a bit more confident, then you try 2 sentences at a time. Keep doing, and now, hey, it might be difficult, and then you might have to recorrect, but over time, you'll get to the point where you can reproduce a paragraph, even a page from memory. It's possible, it just takes time. And what Stevenson found was he took on the voice of the authors he most respected. But obviously, when you're creating voice, and voice, one might argue, is the most important thing as an artist, as a writer. So obviously you don't want to sound exactly like somebody else, but the only way you can create your unique voice is to bring your life experiences and your perspective with a few solid influences. If we look at Blake, his influences were the Bible and Milton. All right, he read them endlessly. Other stuff he didn't bother with. But he obviously become his own voice, did he not? We can see this even in Shakespeare, who probably has the most strong voice of all the writers of all time. Every character is unique. It's like somebody actually that wasn't Shakespeare wrote this character. There's nothing of Shakespeare in these characters. But he, when he's first starting out, and you can look at his early plays, he was strongly influenced by the voice of Marlowe and all these old tales from the Greek and Latin, old fables, Breton lays, all that sort of thing. And this is the same. Every great writer has built their skill on the bedrock, on a foundation of other writers. So what you've got to do is you've got to think, hey, who do I respect? Okay, so now if we're talking about, let's say, Jack London. Everybody knows Jack London, Call of the Wild, White Fang. He really respected Rudyard Kipling. He said, there is much of Kipling in my work. Why? Because what London would do was he would, for hours and hours a day, copy out painstakingly by hand, reproduce all of Kipling's work. Would anybody argue that London doesn't have his own unique voice? No. Would they argue that there is a very strong influence in Kipling? Yes, but it's a conscious influence. We're all influenced one way or another. Now, we want to be consciously, the more consciously we can take our influences, the more we can become our own unique voices. Many people say that artists, good artists steal. They self-consciously steal, okay? You don't just copy, you steal, you take it on. And I thought to myself, oh, who would I like? What disparate influences would I like to consciously take on and make a sort of like weird recipe where it comes out bubbling into something else? Because if you take several people who are all kind of different stylistically and you consciously try to imitate their style, what are you going to create? Now, I thought, hey, I'm going to take Cormac McCarthy. He's very biblical. Wow. And then I'm going to take Jonathan Franzen. I love his colloquial poetry, the poetry of the everyday. He's just superb. And then I thought, hey, why don't we just throw some Shakespeare in there? So I copy out Hamlet by hand. Let's throw it in. I'm not going to write like Shakespeare, am I? But then again, Cormac McCarthy writes like a Bible and everybody reads him and thinks he's a genius. I don't know who Cormac McCarthy read. Well, I can probably make some guesses. And then another exercise you can do is one that Benjamin Franklin did, because Benjamin Franklin wanted to become a great writer. As we all know, he did. He became a great many things. What he'd do is he came across a copy of The Spectator. Don't know if it's probably not the same one, although this is a very old magazine, probably one of the oldest in the world. And then he liked the arguments and the non-fiction essays and stuff like that, and he wanted to model himself on them. So what he'd do is he'd take an essay, and line by line, you'd see a sentence, and then in his own words, he'd break it down. And he'd be like, well, what's the main argument here? Shorthand, notes. Next sentence, he'd do it again, until he's basically put in note form the whole argument. Then he'd put it aside, and then he'd come back to it, and using only his notes, he would try to write the essay again, but in his own words and own style, and then he'd compare it to the original. Now, he said after a bit of time, he was quite proud to pick up on the fact that certain passages actually were superior to the original. It took a long time to get there, but he managed to do that. He managed to make them superior. And then what he would do as well is he'd take these notes and passages and he'd convert them into verse, poetry, because he wanted to expand his vocabulary and he wanted to focus on the musicality, the lilt, the rhythm in the language. So he turned it into poetry. And then he'd turn it back again into prose from poetry. Like, this is a long game, okay? Because he probably would have done this over many years with one passage or several passages at different stages of the, argument. And then what he would do as well is get the argument, he'd get all his notes and he'd cut them up and mix them up. And then he'd go away. And then he'd come back and he'd say, can I put them into a logical order? And that strengthened his ability to logically argue and follow a train of reason. If it's good enough for Benjamin Franklin, if it's good enough for Robert Louis Stevenson, and it's good enough for Jack London, then it's good enough for me and it's good enough for you. And to be honest, they're not the only ones who did it. They're just ones that stood out because they've written about it. But hey, Hunter S. Thompson did it. When he was working at Time magazine, he typed out The Great Gatsby and he typed out Hemingway word for word, because he wanted to see what it felt like to be those great writers. When I first came across the power of copywork, it was when I was working as a copywriter, and there was a lot of challenges going around in the copywriting ad man industry online, where people said, well, if you take classic adverts from Ogilvy, and if you take classic adverts from, I don't know, Gary Halber and all those granddaddies of copy, and you copy them by hand, word for word, you will learn the rhythms of persuasive writing. And it's the same for great literature. I'm not saying you spend all your time copying out great writers by hand, but it should definitely be a part of your deliberate practice. I think when you're writing, you should have a work in progress that you're focused on, whatever that might be, and then you practice deliberately. Other professions do it. Music students will practice scales endlessly. Even the greatest artists of all time, they will practice endlessly. They'll slow down, and it'll be mind-numbing, boring rote work. Okay, painters do it. Speakers do it. Everybody does it. So why don't we do it as writers? Why do we think we can just sit down, plop ourselves down, and write the next great novel? We should be writing the next great novel, the next great play, or the next great series of short stories. But make some time for conscious, deliberate practice. Pick a few influences that you want to consciously take on their power, like drinking tiger blood, and start copying them out. Set aside some time, maybe on a Sunday, that's a routine. Or maybe you do it after your normal writing work, maybe you do 10 minutes a day. Just get started. And hey, I'm really interested, let me know, who would you choose? I've already told you who I'm choosing. I chose Cormac McCarthy, Jonathan Franzen, Shakespeare. I'll probably choose some more. I've also copied out James Baldwin by hand. I could probably choose Jack Kerouac, Conrad. But hey, let me know, who would you copy? Happy writing.